Thank you. All right, so now let's jump back to where we were as we were moving through the agenda in order, which is item 9, the draft submission on the Natural and Built Environments Bill exposure draft. So David and Brent and others, welcome to the table. Yep. All right, so we've got, this was briefed earlier in the week, and we've got the document under separate cover that's been uploaded, which is the latest reflection of the comments that were made and the draft that we're set to approve today. So, David, any comments on this before we ask you any questions?
Oh, look, I'd just like to just very quickly introduce the item, if I may. You have, as you say, the report in front of you, the submission and our proposed changes to the bill. This is the first piece of legislation in the 3 that are coming to replace the RMA. This has gone down a slightly different approach than is normal, in that we've had a preliminary or an exposure draft released, and we are providing submission and feedback on that. That has been quite a quick process, a 5-week process. This legislation will then go through the normal legislative processes next year. We have, just so you're aware, we have worked alongside our regional and sub-regional colleagues. They're also putting in submissions, and I can tell you that the themes of those submissions are all similar to what's in ours, so we're relatively consistent there. Typically, significant pieces of work like this that happen at a local government level do get the opportunity for significant amounts of public involvement. This process, this exposure draft process, and then of course hasn't allowed for that because it has been a relatively quick process. As I have said, this will go through the normal legislative processes as it is introduced into the House. So there will be opportunity later on for people to have their say, but this is obviously going to be of particular interest to communities, and just to be clear, we're a submitter on this. We're not driving the process ourselves. So just to be clear on that. You'll see in the report we've identified the key themes there at paragraph 5.6 of the report and at 1.11 of the submission itself. Submission closes on the 4th of August, so we're looking for a decision to get this put forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now moving to questions. Pauline.
Thank you. And this is a really good submission. I know we've worked quite hard on it, and you have too, so thank you for that. But can you just, in your expert language, help me with 5.3.1, where one of the purposes is to move away from managing effects, such as amenity values, to an outcomes approach. So can you actually just explain in layman's terms the differences between those two approaches and any risks that might be accompanying that? So the purpose, 5.3.1, page 84, 84, Specsavers, moving away from managing effects to moving to an outcomes approach.
Sure. The RMA, when it was introduced in 1991, was flagged as being a drastic change from the way the environment was managed before that date. Before then, there was a focus on outcomes rather than effects. The great benefits, apparently, of the RMA was going to be at focusing on the effects of activity rather than just controlling activities. The proposed benefits of that was that it would be more enabling, because people, decision making under the RMA would be looking at what's the effect of their proposed activity rather than just saying, no, it's an activity of a particular type, therefore it can't happen or it can happen. Things have moved, basically reversed over the last 30 years. The view of central government now is that the focus on effect is having an adverse consequence for environmental protection. That there's not enough focus on objectives and aims. There's too much just case-by-case decision making. So when it says a focus on outcomes rather than effects, the government's objective with the new legislation is that there will be environmental bottom lines. So you're not thinking about just the effects of particular activities, you've got these outcomes being the environmental bottom line, set in concrete, and they shall not be passed. So that's what that phrase is referring to.
Right, so this is a better protection of the environment, phrasing it this way.
Yeah. And it's, if it works, it's also going to be more efficient for consenting for development as well, because it will be more clear what the outcome is going to be in any resource consent process. Right.
And then the only other one was just going back to Helen Broughton's deputation this morning in our submission. I think it was page 10 when that final statement, the council is concerned about the impact on livability of over-intensification. I just wondered if we wanted to emphasise that word over a bit more, because, and once again, it does come down to interpretation, doesn't it? What is over-intensification? But if we could actually, because I think this is a word that Leanne's brought up quite a few times, is intensification, and then there's over-intensification. So just to highlight that a little bit more, maybe in bold, might be quite good.
Yeah, sure. Yep, we can make that change.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Leanne?
I'll just follow on from that, because we had a chat to Helen Broughton at the same time about some of the impacts of the order in council that led to the framework for the consideration by the independent hearings panel of the replacement district plan. So can you just remind us what the three sort of preconditions were for how we were to make decisions about resource use to reduce significantly, and I think they were reliance on resource consent processes, so that's less notifications. The number, extent and prescriptiveness of development controls and design standards in the rules in order to encourage innovation and choice, but the consequence was over-intensification in some areas because there were no limits put on the number of households per square metre, is that right? Per hectare.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Yep. And then the requirements for notification and written approval to be reduced significantly as well. So as much to be done without resource consents required, and if resource consents are required, reduce notification. Would that be a fair assessment of what was put in place here in Christchurch as part of the follow-up to the land use recovery plan?
I think there's a comment in the council's draft submission that the objectives of the district plan review were fine objectives, but we haven't seen that in the district plan that came out of that process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, thanks, and it probably goes back to Helen Broughton's deputation as well. I'm just wondering, or slightly concerned, it's great we're doing a submission, but I mean, the government don't seem to be listening to us on anything else, like water. How do we know they're going to take any notice of this?
We don't.
We don't?
No.
No. Thanks.
But this is a much better opportunity for the council than waiting for the bill to be introduced, because, as David said, councils don't get this opportunity very often to comment on a bill before the government introduces it.
Yeah.
So yes, they may not listen, but this is a better chance to have changes made.
I guess it's more just like we put all this time and resource of your expert time into it, but in other areas like water, they don't seem to listen at all. So
We've, as you say, we've put quite a bit of time into this, and as I said earlier, we've got our submission and we've got proposed amendments to the bill, and of course the bill and what's come out as the exposure draft isn't the entire bill, so we're only providing amendments to what we've seen, but we're trying to make it as simple and easy and as clear as possible for central government to be able to understand the points we're trying to make. And through our lived experience since the earthquakes, provide the experience that we've had. And I know in the ECAN submission, that from what I've seen of their draft submission, they're following a similar pattern too. So we are, yes, I mean, my comment that we don't know if they will take it, I mean, I simply don't. But what we're trying to do is provide as much information in an easiest form to digest as we possibly can, to be as helpful as we possibly can. Yeah.
Thank you. Leanne, back to you.
Well, because this is an unusual process, isn't it?
Yes.
The governments don't normally put out an exposure draft
That's right.
with the framework for input prior to introducing a bill.
That's
So,
right.
and what our submission does is offer to, I can see this is going to be ping pong, what our submission offers to do is to utilise the wealth of experience that we have from what has happened here to contribute to a really good framework for the future going forward. I think we all agree that there do need to be changes to the RMA. So, and I think this is not probably the most important of the three, but it is the foundation for the other two. So that's why it's so important.
Correct. Yanni.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge section 5.5 and 5.6. You've specified the central government will fund community advice centres and friends of the submitter. And I think it might be just helpful to give like the community law example or the community accounting, so that there are models that have been established. And I wonder if we maybe just call it a community planning advice centre or something, so it's kind of clear that it's relating to planning. But the experience of the statement of expectation that the government basically did through the order in council, and then was put into our district plan by the independent hearing panel, almost verbatim. So just in terms of this proposal, the independent hearing panel would be appointed by the regional council. Is that who appoints the independent hearing panel?
No, so this proposed legislation sets up something called a planning committee.
Right.
And it says the representatives on the planning committee, well, I'll go back a step, there'll be one planning committee per region.
Right, so it's a regional planning committee.
And the representatives on the planning committee will be one representative from each of the district councils, one from the regional council, either one or more from Mana Whenua, and one from the Crown. And that planning committee will propose a natural and built environment plan for the whole of the region.
Yeah.
A independent hearings panel will then hear submissions, hold the hearing, and make a recommendation to the planning committee.
So, but that regional planning committee will be the one that appoints the independent hearing panel?
It's not clear in the legislation. It's not clear in the exposure draft who appoints the independent hearings panel or how it's made up.
Right. Yeah.
So that's going to be in the bill when we finally see it, but it's not in the small part of the bill that's in the exposure draft.
I think one point we may like to consider making is there's inherent perception of bias if the government makes a national policy statement or sends out direction, but then also appoints the independent hearing panel. I mean, that was what happened in Christchurch. Effectively, we got the government's agenda put into our district plan without any say over it. So I just think we should flag that as a concern.
Okay, well, we'll have a look at putting that in as a concern, but what I'd recommend the council concentrate on isn't who's on the independent hearings panel, but instead what the independent hearings panel does. So what's more important to my mind is what the legislation says the role of the independent hearings panel is.
Not who appoints it?
Well, if the appointees are doing their statutory job, they do what the legislation tells them they have to do. So
But that wasn't our experience here. We got verbatim the statement of expectation, which was legally questionable, inserted into our district plan by the government appointed independent hearing panel.
Yeah, it was.
Without any community ability to comment on it. So, yeah, and I think that comes back to the other question as well: is who funds and who pays. And I know we've made comments around that.
We've included that concern in the submission.
Another bad experience that we had. Thank you for the work. I won't speak in debate, just to acknowledge the work that you've done on it. I know you've done a lot of work.
Cheers.
Thank you. Sam?
Just one last one. It's probably just in relation to Leanne's point around it is good we get early notice, but I just wondered, Jane, it might be something for you as GM to take offline, how much time we spend as an organisation on submissions to the government. It would just be good to quantify, I guess, that in terms of, I guess, the value for whether they are listing or not. So, thanks.
Pauline?
The planning panel, who decides the makeup of that, and is there a chance that Christchurch can get a seat on that?
So if you're talking about the planning committee...
I know, but hello.
1 out of 10.
Yes, Christchurch will have a representative on it, and the council's proposed submission says that it should be an elected member on the panel rather than staff members or
but the submission also says that there should be that it should be there should be a greater Christchurch urban plan that is developed as a subcommittee really of the planning, so that you actually make some local sense of what is quite a large region, which has different aspects to it. So, I think if you were making this work, you'd actually want to have that local focus in a subcommittee process, feeding then into the national regional plan. Yeah.
All right, Aaron.
Yeah. So will the elected representative be a currently elected or a recently retired mayor?
I don't think we can answer that.
All right. Are there any further questions? Tim?
The one thing that seems to be missing, and it's a lot of talk around, is a bit of joking about politics and all this kind of thing, but under 5.6.3, do you see this bill being closer, allowing more for the residents and public to actually have a say or be heard or listened to or have even an opportunity to be heard? Because at the moment the complaints I get, and they're right across, are that they are excluded and there is no requirement for any kind of development to talk to them at all, and they have no right. So I'm just wondering, does this help at all?
If I look at the government's, the government's got a set of 5 objectives for all the reforms, the 3 pieces of legislation that are coming through to replace the RMA.
Yep.
It's got a list of 5 objectives. One of those 5 objectives is, quote, improve system efficiency and effectiveness, and reduce complexity, while retaining appropriate local democratic input, end quote. So that's the stated objective, to both improve efficiency and effectiveness and retain appropriate local democratic input. So if the government is going to improve efficiency and effectiveness, it has to make processes run quicker and cheaper. One way of doing that is to reduce the amount of public participation.
Yeah.
And the government has invited all submitters to put in any sort of suggestions for improving efficiency and effectiveness. And I suspect that there will be a large number of submissions going in saying, well, if you want to improve efficiency and effectiveness, you have to reduce public participation, reduce appeal rates so that things run through quicker and cheaper. Or make more activities permitted activities rather than requiring resource consent, because if they're permitted activities, no one's got the opportunity to comment on them. So I do suspect that in order to achieve that objective, the central government will, in the bill that we're going to see just before Christmas, hopefully, will be turning its mind to changes to notification of applications, putting in provisions that require more activities to be permitted activities. So I don't think it's going to address the community concern that you've just described.
And it may not be a question for you, but in the last couple of nights I've been to 2 residents groups who have concern, and just to make it clear, they're not against intensification, they're concerned about the amount of it and how it's happening, but they were both unaware of this, which I thought was really surprising. So the question is, we're required to do consultation in a certain way, a certain time frame, etc. Do you think this is the government has done adequate or provided adequate consultation process for the public?
It's probably not something we would have an opinion on. I mean, as I said earlier, it's unusual for an exposure draft to come out, and we've had the opportunity to provide a submission at this stage. The normal legislative processes, as the Mayor has talked to as well, will roll through later this year and into next year, so the public will have an opportunity to participate.
Yeah.
But you're quite right, it's a significant piece of legislative change, and communities are particularly interested in this.
And I mean, we're in the game, and so you would expect it, but the public that aren't, let's be honest, this is a bureaucratic process right across the board, whether it's central government or local government. So for the public to get involved, there actually needs probably to be a better way of communicating or more open, do you think? Oh, sorry, I shouldn't, it's, yeah.
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 Could I just, because I think it's one of those examples, and I mean, I'm not getting into the debate, but it is one of those examples which shows the proximity of councils to their neighbourhoods, you know, and residents who are interested in these things. So that's why I think council staff sent a notice out to the residents' associations.
Correct.
Just to draw their attention to this process, and you know, maybe with a bit of publicity that might come from this meeting. I see,
and we are doing those road
smiling
shows,
in the room. A bit of publicity might actually draw some of those residents groups that you've been talking to. But for heaven's sake, please send this out to all of your residents groups that you're in contact with. As soon as we've sent it off, passed it here, send it out there, say that we've done it. It is only a submission to a process, but it's the beginning of a process. But tell residents that it's happening, and I'm really appreciative that you did that.
And the staff are, I mean, we're doing the road show, etc. But
Yep.
I guess the point is it's actually central government's role to do that.
They can't reach the whole country that way, which is my point about a number of other things.
Are there any further questions, Jimmy?
My question is because 5.3.2, you point out the 16 outcomes covering, as also government focus on. But regarding to the 5.6, all those 10 key themes, will it cover all those 16 outcomes?
Yeah, the way the legislation has been drafted at this stage,
Yes.
there are a list of 16 outcomes that all decision makers under the new Act
Yes.
are required to promote.
Yes.
The concern that the council's expressed in the draft submission is that there needs to be some sort of prioritisation between those outcomes, because some of them conflict with each other. You can't, I don't need to give any examples, but there is conflict between them. So what we're suggesting in the submission is that central government provide better guidance in the legislation itself. Yes. About how some of those outcomes are going to be prioritised.
Okay, yeah, because I only see you kind of nature, environment, cultural value, this kind of put in. But how about urban area or housing supply, etc.? Whether we have any other comments in this?
The submission doesn't make any comments about whether those outcomes are correctly stated.
Yes.
It just accepts that they are the outcomes that the government wants to put into the bill. What's more important is
Yes.
how it's going to help decision making under the Act when there's no prioritisation between them. So there needs to be better direction on the priorities
Yes.
in order for the government to achieve its objective of improved efficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you. All right, so we've got a recommendation in front of us to approve the submission, authorise staff to make further changes, and delegates to the Mayor and Councillor Davidson to approve the final submission. So, Leanne, you'd like to move this? Yep. Is there a seconder? Tim? All right, so moved Leanne, seconded Tim. Is there any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you, and thanks to staff for what I know is a large amount of work that you've done on this. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. All right, so now moving to, so item